Hi and welcome back to a boat called Wanda. Well, I appreciate it's been a very long time since the last update, and that's not to say that I've not been working away here on Wanda or the fuel tank as it stands. It's just that I've ended up with way too much video to go through and edit. It's something like 80 hours and the video was like 40 minutes and it was just getting ridiculous. So sorry to do this to you, but I think I'll just do in a few minutes a recap of what I've done over the last couple of months so that I can bring you up to where I am today and then try and sort of go forwards from here to finish the fuel tank. So just to go back to the last update, at that point I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to use the resin that I'd bought because I read the technical specification and it said the shelf life was 6 months and I'd had it in the shed for coming up to 3 years. So I checked with the distributor and I gave them a call and let them know what the situation was and asked for their advice as to what to do. And I guess there was a big risk there that they would say, oh, the resin was no good, I'd need to buy a new one. But they were actually really reasonable. They said, look, just do a test so long as the resin itself hasn't gone gelatinous. If it hasn't been opened, it could be okay. So, you know, stir the can up well, open the keg, pour it out. If it looks okay, put some styrene into it and do a test layup. So that's what I did, and much to my great delight, everything came out perfectly. I did a little test strip here, as you can see. I made up about 2 or 3 millimeters of some sheet and yeah, it cured well. Everything looked fine, so I set about proceeding to laminate up the plug that I'd made before. So the first thing I had to do was get a really nice waxy surface all over the plug so that I could laminate onto it and hopefully that the tank would come off the plug. So to do that I used this beeswax material. The instructions said to rub it on and then buff it off and then repeat that 3 or 4 times to get a really good waxy surface. So I did that and got quite a really good finish on it. I still used some packing tape around some of those radiuses and corners because I'd sanded down to where the timber had come through, and of course the timber's very porous. So rather than try and wax that up, I just used some packing tape. So here you can see all the different rolls of cloth that I bought. Most of the tank I made up using a 225 GSM chopped strand because I wanted a really light chopped strand mat that would go around all the contours of the plug. I also have some fairly light biaxial, I think this is 300, which is a really soft cloth that will just go over all the contours and bends. And then I've also got some thicker material. I've got 300 and 450 GSM biaxial and triaxial, which I can use for just the straight parts. So yeah, everything's here ready to go. Now, when it came to laminating the plug, I kind of underestimated how long it would take me to do that. And I ended up doing it in 2 sessions. The first session was about 5 hours, and obviously I had to keep on mixing up some new resin because the resin pot would last for about 30 to 40 minutes. And I just got fatigued by the end of it, so I put some peel ply on it and decided to come back to it another time. So about a week later I came back and finished it off. And I think that might have been a mistake because what it meant was that the tank was sitting on the plug for maybe a week or 2, and I think the longer it sat there, the tighter it sort of gripped onto the plug, and I didn't have a smooth experience when it came to remove it. So I think if I was to do this again, I would try and do all the laminating in a day or 2 days tops and then take it off the plug as soon as possible. Anyway, I finished the layup. I put on about 6 layers of cloth, which I figured would be about 2 to 3 millimeters or 3+ millimeters hopefully. Completed the layup and then it was time to remove the tank from the plug. And here's where things didn't go so well. So finally, after a lot of cutting and scraping and leveraging and different ideas to remove the tank from the plug, off it popped finally. So now let's take a look at the fuel tank. So 2 baffles. I laminated up these baffles using exactly the same resin and just some relatively thick 450
triaxial cloth because I wanted to build up thickness. It's pretty sweet, it's pretty light. This was probably about 3 mils, so it's relatively flexible. The baffles have helped stiffen it up, and I need to clean this up and do some sanding and get rid of the rough edges, but essentially there's a few mils gap between the baffle and this, so there's no hard spot, and it's the tabbing that keeps it in place. So it should have a little bit of flexibility in case that keel cavity is moving around a little bit. One thing you might be able to see right down the bottom is you can see all these lines. It almost looks like cracks. What it is that packing tape, where it's contracted, it's created like all these little ripples, unfortunately. But I mean, I think it's all fine. It's just that was gripping onto it when I was trying to pull off the mold, was all these little, you can feel them like tiny little ribs. So what I'm up to now, I've got the lid. This is 5mm G10, which I'm going to use for this. I've got a hole there, and I've got a lid. Now this lid, I'm going to have a series of M8 bolts around here with a neoprene seal that's good for diesel, so that if the tank needs maintenance, I can lift the engine, undo this, and then I can get down into each area, these baffles, to do any maintenance. Okay, so this is going to be the lid piece for the fuel tank. I keyed it up, scratched it up nicely, and then put a layer of that tissue down with a lot of the resin to make it good for diesel. So that's looking good, beautiful texture on that. Right, so now I need to prepare this. This is going to basically be somewhere that I can anchor the bolts into. They'll protrude through here, and then they'll sit in this. I'm going to make sort of a cavity where I can epoxy them in so that they're kind of anchored in. Of course I won't be able to do them up overly tight, but I shouldn't have to. Okay, so I've got my 3 layers lined up now, and I just want to drill pilot holes so that I can center each of these pieces. Right, so now I should have a good alignment between this top lid, which will take this, and the middle piece, which has the hole for the bolt to come through, and then this back side, which is where I'm going to create a strip where this part of the bolt can be anchored in, filled with epoxy. Okay, so now I need to drill out these holes to 8mm, which is the size of this bolt that will go through. Okay, so this is ready to go. I've really scratched up the area around these holes. I used a really coarse rasp because I want to get this really keyed up so that when I epoxy in the bolt heads, they've got a lot of abrasion to grip into, so hopefully that'll do the job. Right, so some epoxy Don't know why I thickened it, but I did actually thicken it a little bit. Just want to tack this in place really, so I don't need too much. No need really to clamp it down or anything, it can just sit there. Okay, that looks like it's centered nicely. It's not bumping up against anything. Job done. Right, so this is fixed down now. So next step is, there's a little bit of a lip here. This isn't really flush, so I'm just going to trim this up a little bit on the routing table to make this even. Right, well that's not too bad. It's not perfect, and some of these corners aren't great. They're a little bit misshapen, so I might just spend a little bit of time getting a bit of shape there. Right, well I'm ready to set the bolts into these little housings that I've created for them. I had a very boring night last night getting the rasp onto each and every one of these. One of the critical factors here is to get all of these bolts positioned perfectly. If they're on anything of an angle and they're set in, I won't be able to get the lid down. I'm going to just put in 4 just to sort of position the lid, because now with these 4 bolts just done up, I can actually center this and position it like such, and then all of these holes, because they're all drilled through with a drill press before, and I know that they're true, will help align the bolts when I push them through to make sure that there's none on an angle. They're all going to be perfectly perpendicular, and then I just need to come back and do these 4 corners again later. So it's going to be a 2-step process. So if I turn it over like this, then I've got all of these perfectly aligned so that when I push them through I know that they're perfectly set. Right, now to mix up some goo. Right, well I've made up my goo. It's one of my favourite mixtures. I've used some milled fibres, some chopped strands, and epoxy and colloidal silica to thicken it up a bit. So the last job I've got to do here is to seal in this underside of the lid by using the particular resin that I've got for the diesel tank. And this is the tissue cloth that they call it, and it's really fine, and yeah, it just really gets saturated and holds in a lot of resin. So I think that's the idea, is to create that sort of protective layer. Unfortunately I'm out of gloves, so yeah, I have to do this bare fingers. So anyway, just try and fold it around here again. Okay. Right, so we'll leave this dry and come back and have a look tomorrow. I've got as much peel ply as I could get onto it. Yeah, I think it's okay. It remains to be seen how well these edges have wrapped around, and if I can trim it flush once it's all dried up. So come back and have a look tomorrow.
In case anybody had any doubts over how well those captive bolts would hold themselves, as I certainly did, I did a little test, so have a look at this.
5mm block here where that bolt head is bedded down with the same material, and then just a plate on top representing the lid. Right, so I'll set the ratchet torque to number 10. That's okay. I'll set it to 20. That's okay. Now for a bit of manual pressure. Yeah. Maybe if I could get a bar on this to leverage it, I could potentially break it, but as you can see, that is very well stuck in here and it's not going to go anywhere. So I'm absolutely confident that even if I had to, I shouldn't have to, I can really get a spanner onto those and put some pressure on, because this bedding compound, it's just like cement. Can't even undo it. There we go.
I'll end the update at this point, and I think over the next week I should be able to get those, or the lid of the fuel tank bedded down into the base of the fuel tank, and get the fuel pickup lines inserted and all the other components that I need to finish it off and take it down to Wanda for a dry fit. So before I go, I'd just like to share with you that it's my father's birthday today. He's in his early 80s, and I asked him last week if there was any tools that I could get for him out here and send them over to Australia. And he said to me, no son, I'm sorry, I've got every tool I need. I don't possibly need any other tool. Now Dad's he's a master wood turner, and he's spent, at least since his retirement, pretty much every day beavering away in the shed making these fantastic things out of wood. But before that, he was always building things in the house, so, you know, complete kitchen fit outs or dining room suites or lounge suites, bunk beds, you name it, he was building it. So it does come as no surprise to me that he's got every tool known to mankind. So in lieu of being able to give him anything decent for his birthday, I'd just like to dedicate this video to say happy birthday, Dad, and thank you. Because I think I would never have been able to take on a boat like Wanda and take on a massive project and just think, you know, I can figure this out, I'll rebuild it somehow. I mean, I don't know what I'm doing half the time, but yeah, a lot of the sort of basic skills and experience and confidence that I got, I guess, to try was down to my childhood growing up with Dad and spending time out in the shed and building things out of wood and learning about materials and how to fix things, etc. So, and Wanda wasn't the first project boat I embarked on either, because when I was probably 12 or 13, Dad bought me a mirror, which is a punt nose plywood sailing dinghy. And when we got this mirror, it was a little bit beat up. It had some of the plywood had come away from the ribs. There was like a cap rail around the top that had come off, and there was a few leaks here and there. So Dad got some chopped strand mat, and I guess it would have been polyester resin back then. And together we laminated up this boat and put it all back together, put the pieces back, painted it up. And off I went sailing, and I really loved that boat. And it was thanks to those sorts of experience that have really set me up for today, being able to, you know, again, have the confidence and a basic understanding on how to fix up a sailboat. So for all of those reasons, thanks, Dad, and happy birthday, and I'll see everybody next time. I too will something make, and joy in the making.